How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Ahoy, everybody. We hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome to Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask the question, is it better than Citizen Kane?
If you like Citizen Kane, that's fine, because we're not here to hate on it.
But when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
So, dear listeners, grab your life belts and head to the boats, women and children first, because today, Parker and I have just one question for you. Are you ready to go back to Titanic?
Lovely stuff.
Is it?
It's good.
I was worried it was a little distasteful.
I don't know, Max. This
People
happened a
died,
really long
Parker.
time ago.
People died.
People died, and
But it feels like it just happened at like 30 years ago.
I don't think so.
Because this movie did such
Not
a
quite.
good job of... I just felt like I was really there.
It felt like you were there. Wow.
Those people on the deck looked so real 100% of the time.
That's crazy.
It's the Titanic episode, everybody.
We did it, folks. We're here.
We did it. We finally did it. And I wasted all my good Titanic jokes last week at the end of the Akira episode, saying things like, it's been 84 years, and we're going in our submersible, and all that stuff. So I had to come up with something different this week.
Got to have some fresh material.
That's how my brain works. So,
Sure.
Parker, neither of us had ever seen Titanic before.
Neither one of us had seen Titanic before.
And yet, watching Titanic, it felt as though I knew exactly what it was, and there were very few surprises.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the argument a lot of people make for like Avatar as like, you know, one of the highest grossing films of all time, this huge juggernaut, like this feels like it has the cultural import that like Avatar wants to have and just doesn't. Like it never you know, seeped into the zeitgeist the same way. Whereas like this movie, just by osmosis of existing and living a life where you're moderately interested in film, I feel like you pick up 75% of this movie.
Yeah.
Just as you go.
And I don't necessarily think that ruins the experience.
I wouldn't say so.
I wasn't like, oh, wow, I didn't know this was in this. Like,
Yeah.
It wasn't like Fast Times, where I had a very specific idea of what Fast Times at Ridgemont High was going to be.
Sure.
And then I was so surprised.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Titanic was kind of exactly what I always thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so what's next?
So what I would love to know what your history with the idea of this movie is, because again, we don't have a history of the movie because we haven't watched it, but like,
Right.
What did you hear about Titanic growing up? Like what space did it fill in your brain?
It filled a lot of memes.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of very like referenced moments from this movie, obviously. I mean, you have a 3-hour movie, you're going to have a lot of moments that are very memorable, especially when it was as successful and kind of beloved as it was.
Sure.
Kind of similar to Forrest Gump in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Of just like a 90s movie that changed a lot of cultural references, I feel like, or just contributed so many. So like, Pay Me Like One of Your French Girls, King of the World, I'm Flying, I'll Never Let Go, all of that was very much in my mind. That's the space that Titanic filled for me. And then as I got older, the memes about it, the memes of My Heart Will Go On.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's just kind of one of those movies that like exists in the minds of like everyone who grew up like post 97 or like even just a little bit before. Like I think we were all somewhat aware of this movie on some level more than we think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the most I'd seen of it before we watched it this week, because we did watch it together.
We did.
Was I mentioned it during the watch, but I saw part of the third act sort of moment on TV once and thought it was very frightening.
Sure.
And I was right to think that, in my opinion. Anyway, Parker, what's your does that gonna answer your question?
Yeah,
feel
I think so. That answers my question.
What about you?
Pretty similar. A lot of references, a lot of memes, a lot of parody. Another one of those weird kind of overlaps that I get with a lot of movies that I haven't seen is when they are referenced in like film documentaries. So I've seen, it's this weird, again, it's this very strange thing of, if I'm remembering correctly, there is a like featurette on the Star Wars original trilogy disc that is talking about like the influence of ILM. And they interview a bunch of filmmakers, and they have little snippets from their movies. And they have James Cameron, and he talks about Terminator 2, and he talks about Titanic. And specifically, like, the moment in the movie where Jack is like, we need to stay on the ship as long as possible, and they're, like, weaving their way through the crowd. That moment, I've seen that clip, which then dissolves to, like, a shot of what it looked like on set while they're filming that. And people are running around. And so, like, there's things like that where I've seen clips of this, and then I've seen the references of, like, how it's being made. But that was kind of it, other than just, I knew it was this huge thing. I knew it was Titanic. I knew it was, you know, this juggernaut that had come around the year that I was born. And that kind of had hovered around for a really long time.
I guess I probably also would have seen, like, if there was one, a CinemaSins video of this. I would have seen a lot of beats from it, but it's not one of the movies that I remember watching one of those of. But
that makes sense.
I am willing to bet that when I was like 12 or 13, I watched like a 15-minute cut of this movie that was a lot worse because it had some asshole just saying mean things over it the whole time. And I was like, this is the height of criticism and comedy. But yeah, so I think that's, because as I think about it, I'm like, I probably did see a little bit more of this.
Yeah.
But I don't remember any of it. So going in, I was shocked to find that it opens with what looks like a DVD menu.
That was a really funny comment from you as we were watching this.
I really did think, I was so, even though we watched it like digitally, I was like, this has such the energy of a DVD menu that I was.
It does, absolutely.
Anyway,
okay, so a follow-up question for you.
Yes.
Was there a reason you hadn't gotten to it yet?
No. I mean, as I got older, it just was long.
Sure.
I mean, in the last few years, I'm not, you know, I wouldn't say I'm like a fan of James Cameron as like a person necessarily. Like as a filmmaker, I don't hold like a ton of respect for him. So that might have been part of it, but not really. I always meant to get to this. I had people tell me, oh, you gotta watch it. And I was like, yeah, I will. Like, I wasn't like, no.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. What about you? Any reason you didn't watch this?
None in particular. It was one of those things of when I was first getting into like studying film, it wasn't allowed. My parents didn't want me watching it because of the nude drawing sequence.
What? Your parents weren't a fan of that?
No, unfortunately. And then by the time I moved out on my own in college, it was the same sort of thing. I was like, I don't know. I'm not crazy about James Cameron. I don't know that I want to sit down by myself and watch 3 hours and 20 minutes of a movie.
And I feel like rarely someone is like, we're having a Titanic watch party. You know, it seems like for a lot of people, either they catch it in theaters when they re-release it every 10 years or so. Or people have like a watch party with like 2 people or 3 people. But it's never like, we're going to get the gang together to watch Titanic. Hey, everybody, come on over. Bring a potluck. It's Titanic time. Because it's not, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts that I've kind of hit upon since we watched it together. Well, really just like one big thought.
Okay.
But yeah, so, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that's a good point of like, well, I was never going to sit down and just watch Titanic by myself, really.
Right.
You know, but it's not exactly something that people are constantly watching together.
Exactly.
So it's like, it's hard to catch, especially as people like, for me, having like, my parents aren't a fan of this movie. Like that would have been the time I would have seen it maybe as like a family movie night. But you know, again, it's like, well, would we watch this with my parents? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's kind of what I landed on, is that during the time of my life where I would just seek out any movie because I thought it was important, was during a time when I wasn't really allowed to watch it and didn't have the energy to like sneak watch it on my own. Yeah. And so when I got to college and I had that freedom, I wasn't in that same boat. Cause like I had that experience with like Lawrence of Arabia when I was like 13 or 14, where I was like, I know this is a really long movie and no one else wants to watch it with me, but I've heard it's amazing. And so I just watched it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I would have done that in college by myself. Like, all right, I'm going to sit down and watch this David Lean, the Peter O'Toole movie for this long that has a built-in intermission.
Yeah.
Which is one thing this movie lacks. This
I
movie
was going to
could
say,
use an
do you
intermission.
think, where would you put it?
I think I'd put it about where the middle of the movie is. I think I would put it like at the sighting of the iceberg, like you make it a cliffhanger.
Okay.
And then it's like, all right, here we have a 15-minute intermission. We'll be right back.
Oh no, what's going to happen?
What's going to happen?
I can't wait to get back in the theater and find out what happens. Yeah, okay. I feel like you've done a lot of the recaps lately.
Yeah.
Maybe it's my turn to do a recap.
I would love to have you do a recap, buddy.
Great. Buddy. How? All right, Parker.
Sport.
We're just co-hosts, Parker. Don't get any ideas.
Don't think we're friends.
Just because I came over to watch Titanic with you doesn't mean we're friends. Just because we got ice cream afterward.
This is just adding to my comment to you the other day of like, man, things are strangely combative. I think
people think we hate each other.
People think we hate each other.
People who don't know us. No. Anyway. All right, Titanic. You sit down. You turn on Titanic. The first thing you see is like a sepia footage of people waving as the boat leaves with like, Pictures Presents. Which studio did this again?
This is, let me look. I have it pulled up. This is Paramount.
Paramount. I was going to say Paramount. Yeah, Paramount Pictures Presents, and you get the instrumental.
It's also 20th Century Fox too, I guess.
Oh, yeah,
I guess
both, isn't it?
It's distributed by Paramount and it's produced by both.
It's such a big movie. They just had to.
They just had to. Yep.
That's probably true, actually.
Probably.
They had such a big pool. They had to get 2 studios in.
Mm-hmm.
They contributed to the pool. Anyway, all right. So the titles cards start, and then the title card comes up, and also the instrumental of "My Heart Will Go On" is playing.
Mm-hmm. Get used to it. It's gonna be here a lot.
Get used to it, everyone. And also, it doesn't sound good.
Okay, should we get that out of the way first, in case anybody just wants to turn it off?
Because why does no one talk about the score to this movie?
See, which is weird. I've heard people talk about it, but it's usually like glowing. I've heard people really like this score.
Everyone, when Parker and I were watching this movie, about 5 or 10 minutes in, Parker just went, "Hey, what is this score?" Because the score, it sounds like MIDI choral, like my mom's electric piano choral setting.
Yeah.
Playing variations on "My Heart Will Go On."
You described it as Christmas music at a certain point.
It feels like Christmas video music. Like almost like a Hallmark, like Christmas sincerity choral, but like MIDI.
The MIDI keyboard is like, the instrumentation sounded okay. It was just the choral, like the voices sounded like I need to. That was one thing I didn't look up, and I showed before we recorded. Is like, I want to know. I was like, there's no way that wasn't just on a keyboard, right? Like, it just.
If it was, they ran it through so much.
Right. Like, there's so much processing done
no
to
one
it.
sings like that.
Yeah. Well, if there's any diehard James Horner fans, feel free to check out now. We said our piece.
Sorry everybody. But also, if you were in the Titanic score choir and you do sound like that, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know. I would have thought. Oh, you went for "I'm sorry to hear that," because we were sorry to hear that. We heard it and we went, ew.
Oh, yikes.
And it won best score at the Oscars for dramatic, because that was when they split it. But anyway, score is weird. Score is except for the Irish bits, which I loved.
I like the Irish.
I liked the little fiddle bits.
I love the fiddle.
That was very good. Okay, so yes, the title card comes up, and then we cut to, or rather fade to, because that's the other thing. Maybe we'll get our 2 biggest gripes out of the way right at the start. This movie has way too many cross dissolves. Am I right,
Cross
Parker?
dissolve city, baby. We're here.
Cross dissolve
We're
city
living.
out here. My
so
letterbox
many.
review was, these people were really drowned in cross dissolves. Am I right? Like, too many.
Too many.
There's other ways to cut, and he does. Once we get to, again, that second half, and we'll talk about it, but once we get to the sinking bit, all of my major qualms with the movie go away.
Yeah.
It's just that first hour and a half or so that I really struggled with, and it's not because I hate romance.
No,
as we've established on the show,
as we have made sure to canonically establish
in
the lore.
I hate big sincere romance. Yuck, I say. That's not true, but for some reason I have a hard time with it sometimes.
Sure.
Anyway, okay, that's our other big gripe. Moving into the movie. Bill Paxton playing a guy who I can't remember the name of. He has one earring.
Love it.
Love it.
Captain Love It.
Is that his name,
Brock
or are you
Lovett.
saying that you love the one earring?
No.
Oh,
that would have
okay.
been
All right.
good too. Yeah, Brock Lovett.
Brock Lovett. That's an okay name. So he is a guy who gets hired by people.
That's what I'm gathering because
because
he's
working
reporting
with
back to
Russians.
his investors.
Yeah. And he's working with like Russian shit. Too.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yeah.
he has been hired to find the heart of the ocean, a
Yeah.
big blue diamond that looks kind of fake.
Mm-hmm.
And so we open with these submersibles going around the Titanic ruins. It's okay. They're fine.
They're fine.
And they pull a safe out of the wreckage and they take it up to the boat and everyone's like, yeah. And the Seth Rogen-ish character with Snoop vision goggles.
Snoop vision.
I'm not going to explain it.
Don't worry about it.
He pops a bottle of champagne and sprinkles it everywhere. They're like, yeah, we did it. And then they open the safe and they dig through some muck.
Yeah.
And then the diamond isn't there.
Yeah, there's some paper money and like a folder with some papers in it. And
Yes.
they're like, okay,
and
well,
Brock's
this is nothing.
like, oh man, I'll call the investors, let him know we'll look again. But you get the sense that, this is kind of like towards the last chance he has.
Yeah.
And then someone opens the folder with papers in it and goes, whoa, well now they go, awooga. No, they don't. But they go, hey, actually take a look at this. And it's a drawing of a topless woman, and around her neck is the diamond. They go, whoa, we got to find this lady.
And in the bottom corner, it's dated the night the Titanic goes down.
The day the Titanic went down. So they're like, wow, big news.
Big news.
For Brock Lovett and his crew. Captain Brock Lovett, I'm sorry. No disrespect to Mr.
I don't actually know if he's the captain or not. He might just, I don't think it's his ship. I don't
But
even know what
I think
his
he would
title
make
is.
people call him captain.
He probably would. I think so.
But he'd
As
say it with
the
like
James Cameron self-insert, he would make people
'Cause
call
he
him
is.
captain.
He is a self-insert.
He is the
I
self-insert.
think, didn't James Cameron have one earring at the time of shooting this?
I'm almost
I
positive.
feel like he did. Anyway, all right.
All right.
So the news, it goes on the news. Wow, this crew led by Brock Lovett, he's got one earring. That's what they say. They say, wow, they found this drawing. Look at this drawing, and they just show the drawing on TV. And I'm like, could you show that?
I don't know.
I guess
was the 90s.
It was the 90s, but I feel like, I don't know, there would have been at least some angry
I'm sure there would have been some
who were like,
complaints.
my kids watch the news.
I think not.
I turn on the news for my kids, and then I go to sleep, and I was awake this time. Go to sleep at noon, anyway. So an old woman is watching, and she goes, oh, or something like that when she sees the drawing. And then...
Well, she kind of tunes in. She starts listening when they're like, oh, they're talking about the Titanic.
Oh, yeah. She tunes in, and she recognizes... Does it seem like... No, we don't hear that yet. So she tunes in a little bit. And then, meanwhile, Brock's back underwater. He's digging through the Titanic some more. He comes up. He surfaces. And they go, hey, you're going to want to answer this phone call. And I think that's the exact line.
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to want to hear this. And he goes over and he answers and he goes, hello. And she's like, hello, my name is Rose and I was on the drawings of me. And then Brock looks at the guy who told him to look at the phone and he goes, I told you you'd want to answer it. And I knew at that moment that I was already tired of James Cameron writing people. Just the most like odd conversations ever. They're not exactly wrong. Like it all feels like something people would say, but it just feels weirdly stiff a lot of the time.
I think it's in the delivery. I think it's in the direction he's giving them.
Told you you'd want to answer it. It's like, okay, all right.
Like, could we maybe do another take of that line read? Just one.
So anyway, she's like, I don't know. She says something clever, right? She's like, oh, I know what happened to the diamond or something like that. So they fly her out with her granddaughter, who's important, by the way. She's not, but she is for one scene at the end.
Right. Because that...
Go ahead.
I just remembered that the reason, like, he's intrigued by the fact that she says the drawings of her, but then she name drops the necklace, and the necklace wasn't mentioned in the news. Nobody knows that's exactly what they're looking for. And so he's like,
right. Oh yeah, she says, yeah, because when he answers the phone, she's like, have you found the necklace yet?
Uh-huh.
And then and that's when the guy's like, I told you you wanted it in.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why they fly her out. You're right. They fly her out. And as she's coming into land, Snoop Vision guy is like, I'm telling you, I researched everybody. This lady wasn't on the Titanic. There was a Rose DeWitt, blah, 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 on the boat. But this lady used to go by Rose Dawson, and then she remarried. She punched out a few kids. And when he said that, I was like, what? And then I realized what he meant. But for a split second, I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Calvert, I think, is her name.
Calvert is her name. Rose Calvert. So he's like, there's no way. She'd be 100. And then
Bill Paxton's like 108.
108, 101. 101 next month.
That's what it is.
And he's like,
next month.
all right, so she's old, but there's no way it's her. Which doesn't really get resolved in a way. I mean, it does in like the general sense, but there's not like a moment where he's like, I don't believe you.
Yeah, there's none of that.
So they all gather around and stop. I'm skipping some of the stuff because this is a long movie.
It's a long movie.
So I'm just getting the big beats. So they take her inside and they start talking to her, and Lovett shows her like some footage of the Titanic wreckage, and the little submersible drone like pushes through a door, and we get our first like cross dissolve to the Titanic itself. It's not a full flashback, but Rose gets a flash of the doors opening when she was on board like 80 years ago, 84 years. And then she's like, oh, it's too much or whatever. Or her granddaughter is like, it's too much. And she's like, no, I'm going to tell it. And Lovett says, are you ready to go back to Titanic? Or he says that at some point. And I just, my one other thing with this movie is that I understand why they call it Titanic, but it feels like such a nerd thing. Like it feels like James Cameron is so like, you can't call it the Titanic. It has to be Titanic. And I'm like, just call it the Titanic, man.
It's fine. You
don't have to call
fine,
it,
dude. Whatever.
Because my other thing is like, if they called it Titanic and then used like she, her pronouns, which people do for ships often. Which is its own can of worms. That would feel better to me if you were like, we got to go back to Titanic. She's down there, you know? It's like, okay. But calling it Titanic and also saying it, I'm like, I don't know.
It's an odd combo.
Anyway, apparently really niche things really grinded my gears for this. Yeah, so anyway, she's like, I'll tell you what happened. And then she tells them what happened. The end.
That's the movie.
That is the movie, because then the rest of the movie happens.
Yeah, all right, criteria time?
Well, yeah. But also, I do want to make a good point. Snoop Vision guy pulls up like a model of the Titanic.
Like a simulation.
And plays a simulation and explains what happened to the Titanic in depth, which doesn't really, I didn't really catch why he was doing that for Rose. I understand why the audience needed to know that, but he was just showing her like, this is what happened.
They don't really establish it. The only way I read it is just like, you were probably panicking at the time, and here's like scientifically what was going on and what caused. I don't know if anybody's ever sat you down and explained like why this happened the way that it did. I don't know. But
I simply wouldn't tell someone.
It's there for the audience.
It is.
But they're telling Rose because they don't have anybody else to tell.
Right. And so initially, Parker, like as we got into the meat of the story, you were like, well, I don't understand the framing device. And I agree that I don't understand the diamond.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But I will say, and we realized this later, like we both
included.
The reason this exists is so that you can explain to the audience what happened to the Titanic, basically to catch anyone who doesn't know up to speed of like, here's what happened, but also to give specifics as to like, this is what happened, then this, then this, then this, then this, so that later when the sinking is happening, we feel more dread because we know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, we're anticipating, okay, it's going to split in half. It's going to, all
then
these
it's going to drop vertically. Like, we know that. And spooky. I'll say that much, but we'll get into that. So, Rose starts telling her story, and she opens with her getting on the boat. And she is kind of royalty. She's not really, but she's marrying somebody who's like a fancy man, really rich, played by Billy Zane, whose name was
Cal.
Thank you. Is that, did they call him that for his last name?
No, it's here, I've got him pulled up.
His name is Calvin Calvert. Oh no, she married someone else named Calvert, right? Sorry.
Calden Hockley.
Calden Hockley. So she's engaged to this guy. Her mom is like, you need to marry this guy. And Rose is kind of, ew. And they get on the boat, right?
Throughout all of this, old Rose is doing narration. So we get a lot of like internalization of what's going on for Rose. Of like, I felt like I was suffocating. I felt like I was dying.
I was a slave being taken on the ship in chains. All right, Rose. Look, I know you had anxiety and I know you didn't want to be there, but not comparable.
Yeah, maybe not the allegory you're going for.
Yeah, maybe not. So she gets on the boat feeling terrible. She's like, I really don't want to do any of this. Meanwhile, Leonardo DiCaprio as Jack Dawson is playing poker with some Swedish guys, Norwegian guys.
Yeah, one of them's named
Sven.
One of them,
Sven. They're playing poker, and he and his Italian friend Fabrizio win the tickets in the game of poker. Yeah. And they're like, wow, we're going to do it. And then this guy's like, no, you're not. The Titanic leaves in 5 minutes. And so they run to the Titanic. They get on board. And that is the last time, really. I mean, they have one moment later, but that is the last time we see Jack and Fabrizio being friends. Yeah.
Fabrizio, for all intents and purposes, does not have anything to do in this movie.
He exists to die.
He exists to die later. All of the secondary characters we meet exist so that we can have a character we recognize die in a very specific way.
Yeah, which, okay, sure.
Sure.
But it is weird to be like, they're friends, and then Jack doesn't talk to him. In fact, they introduce...
He's not like... No, what?
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, just like, there's no point in the movie where he's like, Fabrizio, like, I met the most amazing girl. Like, he doesn't go gush about Rose to Fabrizio.
Which would maybe help me believe this a little more.
Yeah.
I don't know. If Jack had someone else to talk to other than Rose, and then every guy who's mean to him.
Sure.
But yeah, he never is like, Fabrizio, wow. Fabrizio's like, I don't know, Jack. Maybe don't do that.
Yeah, maybe this isn't a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so they're just, they introduce a different guy for Fabrizio to be best friends with. Which, it's fine.
I do not remember the name of.
Nope. So, Jack is on the boat. Rose is on the boat. Rose is having a terrible time. She hates this. She doesn't like to be engaged to Cal. So she goes to jump overboard a little later in the night, right? Did I miss anything super important?
No, that's it. No, okay. That's it.
Yeah, so she's going to jump overboard, and my hands sweat and my feet sweat, and I didn't like it. One other thing I'll say about this is that this is when we get a lot of... First we see the boat set sail, and that holds up. That looks pretty good. Yeah. But what we also get is Jack and Fabrizio on the very front of the boat looking down at some dolphins in the water, and it doesn't look great.
Max and I were watching this, and as we're watching this, we're just screaming at the screen. Stay underwater. You look good underwater. Stay underwater. Don't come up. And then they jumped out and we screamed and we said, no!
Because the water in this looks bad.
Yeah.
Some of those CGI shots of like an overhead shot of like the whole boat looks bad. You get some guys walking around real silly like.
The CGI people are really rough. The CGI boat.
The boat is fine.
And the destruction later on is really solid.
Yes.
I think. And I think a lot of the later half CGI holds up super well because it's at night. It's not in broad daylight, so you can hide some of it.
It's the broad daylight on things that's kind of rough, but especially just the CGI people. Yeah, we weren't ready for that.
No.
And there's like some interesting compositing too, of like people that they filmed on set.
A lot of haloing around the hair.
Yeah.
A lot of that going on.
Yeah, do you want to explain haloing really quick for anyone?
Yeah, so basically what's going on is when you film somebody in front of a green screen or a blue screen, something you're going to key out later, you get hair, obviously, is a lot thinner and more sparse, and so some of that color leaks through with like, certain areas of your hair. And you can do really clean and crisp like cutouts of actors and talent on those green screens. But when you don't, you get a thing called haloing, where you get a really soft edge. For those of you watching on the video podcast, it kind of looks like this blur effect on Zoom, where you just get this kind of weird Gaussian blur around the edges of characters, but specifically around like actors' hair.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's impossible to fix. Like, you can fix it. But, that's kind of come through with technology. It's gone along. And this is, again, 97, so I can't be too hard on it. But there is some noticeable like haloing around people's heads with
Yeah.
that green screen keying
Yeah.
going on.
Which is mainly, like you said, kind of just a result of the time.
Sure.
But yeah, so, we get all those little great moments of just really kind of CGI. But then later that night, Rose is having a really terrible time, so she goes to jump off the back of the boat. And I hated that because it really made my hands sweat. Jack walks up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jack walks up and he's like, "Hey, don't jump off the boat." She's like, "I don't know you. Don't talk to me." And he's like, "If you jump off the boat, I'm going to have to go in after you.
And it's
gonna be
really cold. I don't want to do it.
I don't want to do it." And she's like, "It's cold." And I'm like, "Rose, you would know that." But he's like, "Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota or Wisconsin or wherever." And he's like, "And it got really cold.
Chippewa
And
Falls.
It's going to be so cold."
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Leave me alone. I want to die." Does he say anything else at that point?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty much. I think it's just basically, hey, like it's his kind of smooth talking way of like, without freaking her out, trying to talk her down from doing this.
Yeah. And then he has her come back onto the deck in the dumbest way possible.
So
he's like, "Take my hand," and he reaches his right hand out past her left shoulder so that she reaches across with her right hand and turns to face him again. And he takes her hand. Just have her hop over.
Yeah, literally just be like, hey, you're facing that way. I'm going to reach out and like grab you under your armpits.
Yeah,
I'll
and
just
we're going to pull you over.
We just like, yeah, lift yourself up.
Because then she slips.
Mm-hmm.
And she's dangling and she's yelling, "Help, no."
Yeah.
And he heaves her over to the point that she collapses on the ground and he collapses on top of her. Also, he had taken off his clothes a little bit. Not all
taken
of
off
them.
his jacket and his shoes.
jacket and his shoes to like potentially to show that he would jump in after her.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the guys come around the corner and he's on top of her with some of his clothes off. And they go, So they call everybody and they're like, "We're going to arrest you for assaulting this woman." And then she goes, No. I was leaning over and I got too close leaning over and I almost fell off and Jack Dawson saved my life. Mm-hmm. And everyone goes, "Oh, well, one guy goes, "Well, in that case, he's a hero." And Cal is like, "All right, give him $20. And then Rose is like, Is my life not worth more?"
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Invite him to dinner then," or whatever he says.
Yeah.
Invites him to dinner.
Well, yeah, he makes a big show of it because like he's like, "Oh, well, then in that case, like he should come to dinner," and like leans to his friends like, "Oh, this ought to be good." Like he's setting him up to embarrass him later in front of all the friends.
But then Lovejoy, his little man, his old grimy manservant of a guy, kinda. He's like, "Interesting that you had time to take off your shoes and jacket
when she slipped so suddenly."
Showing
and
that
it never comes back.
It never comes back. Because why would it?
Why would it?
When there's so much more going on. So, the next morning, Jack and Rose go for a walk, and they have a nice little conversation. And she says something really mean. She's like, "You can't," because she tells him a bunch about her life and how she hates her life and how she wishes she weren't engaged to Cal. And he's like, "Do you love him?" And she goes, "You can't ask me that." It's like, you just told him so much.
What are you talking about?
And maybe that's like a character choice to be like, no,
sure.
she's so, she can't make up her mind. She knows this is wrong, but it just comes across as inconsistent.
It's a weird choice.
And then she has another weird turn. So he's like, "Oh, so you insulted me," because she almost calls him poor and tells him to go back to third class or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then she has a really weird turn where she grabs his book. She goes, "Well, let's take a look at these. What are these, huh?" And then she flips through his drawings and she's like, "Oh shit, these are good." And he's like, "Yeah, they're French prostitutes or whatever." And she goes, "Oh, this will come back later." Anyway, so they do that. And it's at this point, Parker, that you brought up an interesting point, which is, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So we were just watching this scene and I turned to Max and I was like, is he a manic pixie dream boy? Like, because his whole spiel is like, well, I go where I please. And like later on, the scene following this, when he goes to dinner, he's talking to all the rich people. And like, well, what do you do for work? He's like, "Oh, I go wherever. I go where the wind takes me. Like, I love not knowing what's going to happen to me when I wake up, And it's just all this like free spiritedness and artisticness and like these qualities that are so hyper specific to like the manic pixie dream girl trope.
Yeah.
That I hadn't really seen done before flipped like this.
Yeah. And if it were done with intent, I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I don't think it's intentional.
No, but you also made the point of like, well, you'd think that like the fault that would make him not a manic pixie dream boy would be that he has a temper, but he doesn't really.
Right, like people are constantly punching down on this guy, and he's pretty, like, he knows how to bite his tongue.
Like, later, he kind of gets angry, but in fairness, it's when he's about to die and the boat's sinking, which I think if you put any Manic Pixie Dream Girl in that situation, she would do the same.
Sure.
Put a Manic Pixie Dream Girl in Titanic, and she, too, would snap back. That's how we get depth to these women, you know? We put them on the Titanic, and then we get to see their true side.
Exactly.
We get to see their three-dimensional side. But yeah, I think that's an interesting point of like, and maybe why Jack is such a beloved character in a way, because the other thing that we realized watching this is that we weren't super convinced by their chemistry or the dialogue or the performances. Like,
they're really good kissers, though.
They're so good at kissing. Every time they kiss
the hell out of each other.
Every time they kiss, I went, "That's a good kiss," and Parker went, "That's a good kiss."
Yeah,
they were so good at kissing.
Like, that part's great, but I agree. Everything else, like, because so much of this is this grand operatic romance, is like how it's been sold to me and what I've heard people talk about. I don't know. I thought that maybe it would just be this like undeniable electric thing when you see them on screen together. They're just like, man, like that's something.
Yeah, but not really.
I don't know. I wasn't feeling it. And, you know, as the canonical lore set lover of grand romances in film out of the two of us, I was expecting to like really be on board with this, and it just, I don't know, never really clicked.
It felt kind of flat a lot of the time, which is so weird because, again, I'd had such a buildup of like, this is one of the great modern movie romances, like one of the great movie romances, and I just was kind of, it fell flat for me in a lot of ways. Well,
you pointed out something interesting, and I'm skipping ahead slightly, but it's a long movie. Speed us up through the dinner scene really quick, and then I'll say what I have to say.
Okay, yeah. So so they do some spitting together. Jack teaches Rose how to spit, which is a good setup. There's a lot of good setups and payoffs in this movie. I'll give him that. But yeah, he teaches her how to spit, and then Kathy Bates, who's in this movie. I didn't know she was in this movie. She plays kind of like she's kind of American, and she's not. She's like hangs out with the rich, but she's not really she's not as hoity-toity as the rest, so they don't like her.
Yeah, she's Molly Brown. She's one of the real-world historical figures.
Right, and so she goes up to Jack, and she's like, "I'm a real historical figure." No, she doesn't say that.
That's what she says.
She says, "You're fictional." Until after the movie, when James Cameron realized there was a Jay Dawson on the ship, which was completely coincidental.
What?
Anyway, so she came up and she was like, "Jack, you got to learn how to play this game." Like, she's like, do you know who you're dealing with? And he's like, "No." Anyway, but she does a nice thing. She gets him a tux. She gets him a tux because her son's tux is with her. And she goes, "I knew that you'd be about the same size." And he's like, "Yeah, almost the same size." And so he goes to dinner. And he's there, and Rose's mom, and Rose's narration is like, "My mom didn't like him very much." And I'm like, we know. You don't have to do so much narration, old Rose. But his mom is basically trying to get him to sound like an idiot. Yeah. So she keeps saying things like, "Where are you from?" And he's like, "Chippewa Falls," and like all that stuff. And then she's like, "And you just travel around. Like, are you going anywhere when you land? Like when you get off the boat?" And he's like, "Nope, I don't know." And he basically wins a lot of them over in a way.
Yeah, he does. He's very he's very charming. He's like, "Hey, look, like I am a soldier of fortune," basically.
Yeah, and he says, "Making it count."
Yeah,
he says, "I make it count." And then everyone goes to "making life count." Yeah. Except for Cal, who's pissed.
He's pissed.
So that's dinner, and then Rose kind of leans over to him and is like, "And now they retire to go have cigars and congratulate themselves on another great dinner party or whatever." And he's like, "Do you want to see a real party?"
Yeah, he slips her a note, and he's like, meet me here. And then he's like, "Let's go to a real party.
Meet me at the clock at 11 or whatever." And she meets him there, and then he goes, "Do you want to see a real party?" And so is that good?
Yeah.
Is this what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. So it was just I wanted to talk about just, we're here at the dance party scene, and it's just full of life and music.
Yeah, they go to the third class part of the ship, and they're having a big party with like fiddles and beer, and it's all these really fun characters having a good time.
Yeah, they get to dance around and do all this fun stuff. You get to see Rose let loose a little bit.
Yeah, and she is talking to guys who are arm wrestling, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And like that's the thing that you were talking about when we were watching this, as far as like trying to get the romance to sell, is we just needed more of this. We needed more of them having a good time together.
Yeah.
And like,
that's a great way to sell us on the chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Because like, I feel it. I feel it in this scene specifically.
Yes.
Like, even the tropey stuff, even the like, oh no, I can't dance, you can't. He's like, no, come on, you gotta come dance with me. Like, you know, we've seen it a million times, but it works here. Like, it's doing what it needs to do. And I just wish we would have, like, this movie is 3 hours and 15 minutes long. Like, you could have had time for this somewhere.
Yeah.
But what they're trading on, and this is something I wanted to mention in our breakdown of all of this, is that periodically, it doesn't matter where in the sequence of all this, periodically throughout this first half of the movie, we will cut to scenes with the architects of the ship talking to the captain. And like one of the guys is like, hey, I want it to like, we need to get there as quickly as possible. We need to open up all the boilers.
They were in awe of the size. Now I want them to be in awe of the speed.
Mm-hmm. And the captain's like, I don't know. I'm a little nervous about that. And he's like, well, you're retiring. This will be your one last triumph. We get a lot of these scenes. There's a lot of scenes pointing out the hubris of, oh, there's not enough lifeboats. And, oh, we're pushing the ship too hard. And, oh, we shouldn't be going through these waters right now. Like, we should be wary of, you know, it's going to be cold. We should keep an eye out for icebergs and stuff like that. And, like, there's a lot of that. Yes. And I think it's almost too much at a certain point. Like, it just gets to be so... Like, you were talking about, like, this movie does a really good job with setup and payoff. And I think it does. In a lot of ways, it does a really good job with that. And in other ways, I think they could have afforded to just dial back. We know the ship is going to crash.
There's a few too many moments where they're, like, winking and nodding and being like, this thing's unsinkable. Like...
Yeah.
And it's a little much. Like, we get it, you know? Especially with the framing device. We know what's going to happen. We don't need you to keep hinting at it. But yeah, I agree. Like, there's room for more fun between Jack and Rose if we cut some of that out.
Right, that's the reason I bring it up. It's like, if you got rid of some of those, we could have more time with Rose and Jack, and I think I would buy this more.
Or maybe even just make their conversations more fun. Like, there's just a lot of, like... And I get it because she's, like, of an upper class and he's of a lower class, and you need to get over that hurdle.
Sure.
But I just feel like if we had had a little more time of them getting into mishap, you know, doing some silly things together, I would just believe it a lot more. But a lot of it is so... And I will say this. I mentioned it, like, at a certain point while we were watching the movie. I was like, I do appreciate how sincere this movie is. Because we now live in this time where it's harder to find sincerity in a lot of movies. Like, I say that, it's not entirely true, but like big mega like movies that do really well often aren't. I guess I'm mostly just talking about like the blockbusters, you know, like they just aren't as sincere. Like, there's this kind of fear of sincerity in a lot of modern filmmaking. And Thomas Flight on YouTube has a really good video essay about like postmodern and postmodern filmmaking and all of that I really recommend, which dives into that, the idea of like making sincere films and that sort of thing. And like, anyway, I just think that's interesting. But I do think that like this focus on all of this dialogue between them has to be so like almost like soapy, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, does it? I don't know. But yeah, so anyway, they go to the party. Lovejoy, Cal's manservant, sees her down there, and we basically just cut to the next morning of Cal confronting her and saying, you can't do that. And she's like, whatever, I'm your fiance, something. He has this really good delivery. He's like, fiance? And he like yells and he knocks the table over, and he's like, yes, you are my wife, and you will respect me. We'll do these things. And she gets really scared, and he leaves. And then she and this maid kind of have a moment where her maid's like, it's okay. And she's like trying to keep it together.
Yeah, she's
Rose
trying to keep it together. And
she can't. So then we go to church. There's a church service on the boat. And Rose is there with her mother and Cal and everybody on the first class part of the ship. And Jack shows up and he's trying to see her. And Lovejoy turns him away and is like, you get out of here. Like, you can't be in this part of the ship anymore. You were welcomed for last night, but you're done. So Jack goes and he steals a coat and a hat, which will come back later. and he goes and he kind of pulls Rose aside for a moment, and he says some weirdly manipulative things.
It's a weird scene.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, basically he's just like, if you stay in this life, it's going to kill you. Like, you're going to wither, you're going to die, your light is going to go out. And the only way, like, it's not laid out exactly in these terms, but it feels very much like I'm the thing that's going to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And like she pushes back a little bit where she's like, I don't need you. He's like, I know, but like you need to get out. Like that's what you need.
Yeah, and then he's kind of like, it is your choice. But it's like, well, you clearly don't think that. Like you
Right.
clearly want her to, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
just
weird
kind of,
scene.
It's a weird scene.
I get what he's trying to tell her. Like I get that he's trying because like
Right.
that's the scene immediately following this is like her cluing into all of that.
Yeah.
Of seeing a little girl at lunch who's being forced to be prim and proper, and she's like, "Oh, I was forced to do that. I'm gonna keep being forced to do that over and over." So like I get the point that he's trying to go for, but it does come across as like weirdly manipulative.
Yeah. So anyway, then at that dinner, she sees the girl and she's like, she has her Emma Stone in La La Land moment where she's like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And she runs to him at the front of the ship. He's just at the front of the ship and she's like, I changed my mind. Mm-hmm. He's like, great. And then they have the I'm flying bit where she gets up. And I was reading that the sunset is real. It's not CGI. Nice. They kept trying to get it. And there kept being cloud coverage while they were trying to shoot because the whole set for this was built like half a deck. It was built seaside so that you got that. But yeah, they kept trying to get it over and over again. They spent like a few days trying to do it. And then at the last minute, there was cloud cover on the last day they were going to try and shoot. And they're like, I guess we'll just have to fake it. And then the clouds broke for like 5 minutes or so. And they were like, okay, get everyone. And they got it. They pulled Kate Winslet out of makeup and they got everyone together and they got it to the point that it was so rushed that shot is out of focus a little bit. But the sunset was so good that James Cameron's like, we'll put it in.
Yeah.
Which I respect, Sure. You got that, you're going to put it in because it does look great. I think you had the comment of, for such an iconic line and moment, the delivery is kind of awkward of like, I'm flying, Jack.
Yeah,
like,
the pause. It's like, because anytime I've heard people recite it, it's all one thing. It's, I'm flying, Jack. Like, I've only ever heard it that way.
Yeah.
And then just the pause threw me off of, I'm flying, Jack. Like, just the pause was weird to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It caught me off guard.
Caught me off guard because it's not how everyone else said it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they do that, and that's basically like, they're together now,
Yeah.
So the next day is kind of, we get into the rest of the movie, at least, this part of the movie of the next day. She's like, draw me like one of your French girls wearing this necklace. And he's like, okay. And then she's like, wearing only this necklace. And he goes, whoa. Anyway, so then they go down and what? And they and he draws her. Mm-hmm. And apparently Parker ruined this for me by letting me know that it was James Cameron who apparently did the sketch.
Yes, it is.
Which just made me feel a little weird. So then, so they do that, and then Cal is like, where is she? And then Lovejoy goes down to check out the room and catches them just as they're running away together. Mm-hmm. He chases them around, and they go into the engine room, and they like run around, and then they end up in the garage, like the shipment part of the Titanic, where people are keeping their things, like their big things.
Yeah.
And they get in the car, and they have some car sex.
That's right.
On a boat, which is pretty... Not many people can say they've done that.
No.
I'd imagine. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't asked anybody. So maybe that's a common occurrence.
Yeah, maybe do a census poll on that one.
Yeah. And by raise of hand, how many of you have had sex in a car on a boat? Wow, everyone.
Oh, okay, wow, okay.
All right, well, I guess my life just really sucks then. No, anyway, so then after they do that, they go out on the deck to kiss. Mm-hmm. And there's some guys, they introduce some like, Gilbert Stein, like some guys who are up there and they're
observing.
They're like, right, we're up in the boat's nice, we're looking out. And he goes, look at these two kissing. And then he's like, wow, don't you wish we could be warm like this? And he's like, if that's what it takes, no way. And he pushes him off. Mm-hmm. And then they go, wait a second.
I literally turned to you and I said, if they don't see the iceberg because they're watching these two make out, I'm going to lose my mind.
And that's what happened.
And then very quickly they're like, is that an iceberg?
Oh
like, you didn't go, no! Wild.
But I'll say this. So eerie, the iceberg.
It's
lit so dark that like in that moment I understood how they could have missed it. Mm-hmm. Because at night it's so dark that it's just this gray mass. And it, even just thinking about it now, it still gives me chills. Like it's
scary.
It's really ominous. And so they call down, there's an iceberg, and then there's this huge effort to like try and turn the ship, slow the engines, put them in reverse. It's not enough. and they scrape along the side. And I do think that the Snoop Vision goggles guy earlier, that scene earlier, is a really good thing that they included, because he has a really good like description of it. He's like, it's like Morse code, like bup, 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 and it cut across the whole of the ship, letting water in. And I just think that was such a good description, because later when that does happen in the flashback, I was like, I know exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah,
and it's awful.
Yeah, there is, from here on in, I'm pretty locked in with the movie. Like, there's a couple things which we'll talk about in the second half, but like,
but you made the point of like, this is the filmmaker that James Cameron is.
Totally.
James Cameron is not a romance filmmaker, because the first hour and a half of this movie is so much cross-dissolve, weird kind of stiff performances between the romantic leads, and just kind of boring and dull. I think I said at one point during the first half, I was like, I keep getting excited that the ship's gonna sink, because that sounds more interesting to me.
Right.
And then as soon as this happens, basically we kick into a different movie that is a James Cameron movie.
Totally. It's suspense, it's anxiety, it's action.
It's kind of a horror movie.
It's kind of a horror movie.
And it's really good.
Yeah. It's really effective.
It's really
effective.
And like
just this whole first sequence of when they see it and they're desperately trying to get it to turn.
Yes.
And I've like listened to people talk about this, and I've watched video essays and things. And like a common comment I've heard from people across the board, and it was something I felt, is that like, we know what happens. We know what the Titanic is. Even if you didn't, like, we saw the beginning of the movie, we know what's going on. But somehow, some way, there is still a piece of you, like, as like the first mate is like, turn, come on, turn. Like, you almost in your gut think they're gonna miss.
Yeah.
You think like, okay, no, they'll be fine. Like, there's this moment that passes through you as an audience member, despite knowing that isn't how this ends.
Despite the selling point of this movie being the ship that sinks.
Yeah, but just, I don't know, something about that sequence, like, it captures you in a way where you're like, maybe they'll miss this time. Maybe this is a different movie. I don't know.
I don't know.
It sells it really well.
It does. And they hit, and from there, there's basically just a consistent feeling of dread.
Yeah.
We get scenes of them waking up the architect, Victor Garber, and they bring him up, and they're like, this, and he's basically explains, like, there are 5 chambers, and if 4 of them filled with water, we'd be fine. 5 of them are filling with water. He's like, we're done. We have an hour. And just like, he immediately is like, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, because all of them are in like damage control mode of like, okay, we'll slow it down, we'll do this, we'll do that. And he's like, no, like, we've passed the point. He's like, it's one of those things. He's like, if it was 4, we'd be fine. Because I think there's like 10 chambers or something. And he's like, if we was at 4, we would be okay. 5, it's over. There is nothing we can do.
Yeah, which is just wild. Meanwhile, Jack and Rose saw this happen, and did they go back down to the room, or did they
they're
grab
like
them?
No, they go down to the room, because they're like, okay, that was, I don't know, that seemed kind of spooky. Let's go check and just make sure things are okay.
They get found by Cal and Lovejoy and all those guys. Meanwhile, Cal has gone down there, found the drawing of Rose,
and a little
note from her that says, now you can keep both of us locked away, meaning the diamond and her. So he is pissed, and he's like, oh, a plan comes to me. He doesn't say that, but he's like, oh, a scheme has been born in my mind's eye. I will say this, he's not talking like that, but Billy Zane seems to be having a lot of fun with the role for the first half.
He does. He seems to be having a good time.
There's a lot of fun deliveries from him, and we'll talk about one later that we really like. But
it's really good.
Anyway, so they bring Jack and Rose down, and Lovejoy slips the diamond in Jack's pocket as they're coming in. And then he's like, Jack stole the diamond, and they pull the diamond out of the pocket, and Rose is like, no way. And then they take the jacket off of him, and they're like, even the jacket is stolen. And she's like, I don't believe it. And Jack's like, he's framing me, Rose. Don't believe it. But she believes. She does. And Parker, I think you have something to say.
Okay, listen. I think, genuinely, I can't think of a single other trope in media I despise more than the forced misunderstanding. I hate it. I hate it so much. You can get interpersonal drama from real, actual things people do. You don't have to make up some sort of bullshit, weird Looney Tunes like scheme to get people to misunderstand each other. And it happens all the time.
All the time.
It happens a lot in like animated films and like
Yes.
children's films, which I give it a bit more of a pass there, but I still don't like it very much. It is wild to me that it shows up in this deadly serious drama.
Yeah.
And it's played completely straight of just like, oh yeah, I guess he's a thief. Oh no, this person I knew. It's like, what are you talking about?
Talking about.
I hate it. I hate it. I hate it.
So Cal is like, Lovejoy, arrest him, take him down below and arrest him. Meanwhile, things are getting pretty real for the crew of the Titanic. They go, all right, everyone start put your life belts on.
But they aren't telling anybody what's going on.
They're not telling everybody. They're just like, hey, everybody, this will be fun.
Let's all go to the main ballroom, but grab your life
belts.
grab your life belts.
Let's just hang out in the ballroom together. Just whatever,
and
you know.
As they're all congregating, Rose grabs what is his actual name? I want to know, like the character's name. Thomas Andrews, the architect.
Yes.
Yeah. She grabs him because previously it's been established that they have a friendship. Like she's been very fascinated by the ship. He makes some of those comments where like she's like, "Hey, she's like, how many passengers are on the ship?" And he tells her, and she's like, "I was counting, and like, I don't think we have enough lifeboats." And he's like, "Yeah, I know." He's like, "I wanted to put more, and they said it looked too bulky."
Yeah, it looked too cluttered.
Yeah. So they got rid of him.
So they've established like a friendship between them.
Yeah, they've established friendship, and so she grabs him, and she's like, "Give it to me straight. Like, what's happening?" And he pulls her aside, and he's like, "It's going down." Yeah, he's like, "There's nothing we can do." He's like, "Don't tell anybody unless you absolutely have to. I don't want to be I don't want to be the reason for a panic. But
right, and,
please,
and Cal overhears this. He goes, "What?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that's when she's like, "Oh my god." So
yeah,
they go up to the deck and they're getting on the lifeboats. The mom and Kathy Bates get on the lifeboat together, right?
Yeah.
And Kathy says, or no, sorry, the mom says, she's like, "Well, I hope that the boats aren't too crowded," or something like that. Like, I hope they don't crowd the boats too much.
Yeah.
And Rose is like, "You jerk." She's like,
you're the worst.
You're the worst. I hate you and you're the worst. And Cal is like, "Get on the boat." And she's like, "No." And she runs off to find Jack, right? That's
because she really like when Cal's yelling at her, she clues in. She's like, "You're a terrible person. Wait a minute, you lied."
What did she call him? She calls him something like, "You incalculable bastard," or something like that. Like, it's pretty good. So yeah, then she runs to go find Jack. Jack has been arrested. He's been handcuffed to a pipe by Lovejoy just in the lower decks. And then Lovejoy pulled a gun out.
Yeah, he's just like fiddling with the gun. And he's
really
like rolling the bullet up and down. Like the ship is like tilting at this point a little bit. And he's like rolling it on the tilted table.
Yeah.
And then he's like, he's like, "I'll tell you something. I think the ship is going down. Pity you're still going to be here." And like just leaves him.
Yeah. Yep. So that sucks.
Yeah. Sucks to be Jack.
Sucks to be Jack, just a kind young man who draws naked women and
it's tough.
Handcuffed to a pipe on a boat. Anyway. So this is where I think it gets really spooky. This is the part of the movie that I had seen before on TV, which is the water creeping down the hallway, water filling the boat, these lower decks, right? We see the guys in the engine room trying to get out. The doors are closing to keep the water from spreading, but they're like trying to get out. Some guys get trapped. Yeah. Water starts filling in. Rose is going below. She gets the guy in the elevator to take her down. And as the elevator goes down, water starts filling the elevator. She gets down the hallway. She tries to find Jack. She finds him. And this is really frustrating, is how when they get together, they're like talking too much.
Why? Like, they're talking about the misunderstanding.
Yeah, she's like, I knew you. And he's like, "How'd you know?" And she's like, "I always knew." And it's like,
now is not the time.
Yeah, it's like you're
water is up to your ankles.
You need to get out of here. And he's like, "Rose, you gotta find a key, Rose. Come on, Rose." And he says Rose too much, and she says Jack too much. And that was my other gripe, is that they say their names too much. Something in my screenwriting class, I would be like, they say their names too much. Maybe cut some of the names out.
Yeah, maybe cut that out.
Anyway, she can't find a key, so she tries to go find someone to get help. She gets an axe. And this is where it gets really scary.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is where the lights are flickering. Water is really high.
You can hear like the groaning of the ship.
It's awful. I hate it. I don't do well with like deep water. in the ocean and stuff, and I hate it. This part is awful.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably awful for everybody, but I do understand why it keeps coming back to theaters and why people keep going to see it, because I bet that sound design hits different.
I'm sure it's crazy.
I bet it's crazy.
One thing I was thinking about since you and I watched it during this whole sequence that I'd forgotten about was probably like 10 or 12 years ago, there was a traveling exhibit about the Titanic that was going around museums, and it came to a museum in Idaho where I was living at the time. And something that they had is they had a piece of an iceberg that was like being chilled. So you could go over and touch this thing and like look at the size of it and feel how it was. And then they also had like a tank of water that was chilled to the temperature the water was, and you could like stick your arm in and see how long you could like hold it there. And like I'd completely forgotten about that until like after the movie, and just like seeing that, like they talk about how cold it is, and there's like moments where like, you know, when she goes down to get him, like she like gasps for air as she gets in the water because it's just really cold. But just like I'd forgotten about that. It's something that they're doing a really good job of selling, but like that was such a specific sense memory I had of like going to this exhibit and like sticking my arm, and like I could maybe keep it in there for like 20 seconds before it started like really hurting and I had to take it out. And I was just like, people are just sitting and swimming and wading through this stuff, and just man,
awful. Sounds awful
stuff.
Takes the axe, and this is maybe the best joke in the movie.
It's a really good joke.
is when she comes the axe and she gets ready to just chop the handcuffs off, and he's like, do some practice hits. Go over to the cabinet, do some practice hits. And she hits it once, and he goes, okay, great, Rose. Now try and hit that exact same spot again. And she just completely misses.
Like misses it by like 3 feet.
And he kind of looks at it, and then he goes, all right, practice is over. Right, something like that.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's really good. Like the delivery and the pause is so good.
Yeah.
She comes over, she hits it, and she cuts him clean.
First try.
And they kiss, and I'm like, get out of there.
Get moving. Yeah.
And they get out of there. But it's really hard to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
There's elevators and staircases, and it's really claustrophobic, and it's terrible.
Yep.
Meanwhile, up above, panic is happening kind of now as people try to fill the lifeboats. They're sending women and children first. There's a good moment where a man gets on the boat, and the guy, like one of the kind of security guys, sees him but just kind of lets him go down anyway.
Yeah. Because he's one of the architects, and so it's kind of assumed that he should be going down with the ship. Kind of. It's like, are you going to have some honor? Are you going to stand by your like shoddy workmanship? And he's a coward.
And the guard, you kind of get the vibe with the guard, and they confirm this later, where he's like, "You're going to regret that. Like you're going to feel bad." And like, there's a shot later where the guy feels really bad because he's on a boat with just women and children. But yeah, I mean, we can kind of breeze over that stuff, right? There's just a lot of panic. There's some gunfire.
A lot of panic. Yeah, there's
like
chaos starts ensuing.
Jack and Rose get back up to the top deck. And this is what we talked about. There's kind of a repeating of beats here, which feels kind of redundant. I get why they're doing it, but Jack puts Rose on a lifeboat, and Cal comes over, and she's like, "No, Jack, you're not going to catch a boat." He's like, "No, I'll figure out a way. You just go down now." And then Cal's like, "I have an arrangement with one of the shipmen." It's like, "Jack will join me." And there's a great moment where Jack looks at him and is like, he knows that's not true, but Jack's like, "See, I've already got my own boat."
Like, it'll be fine.
Yeah, so head on down. And then as she's being lowered down on this boat, Jack's like, "There's not an arrangement, is there?" And,
he's like, "You're a good liar."
And Cal's like, "Yeah, there is an arrangement, but it wouldn't do you any good."
Yeah.
And so basically there's a liar. And then Rose realizes that that's not going to happen, and she realizes that she wants to be Jack, and she jumps off again. And she gets off the lifeboat again and runs up to Jack, and Jack's like, "What are you doing, Rose? That's so stupid, Rose. You're so stupid. You're an idiot. Like, I fucking hate you. You're an idiot." No, okay.
If you jump, I jump, which is a big
it's just a big thing from earlier, from when she was going to jump off. And then Cal comes down, and he snaps. He snaps, and he pulls out a gun, and he tries to shoot them.
Yeah, he takes the gun from his manservant and tries to kill them both.
And he chases them down into the water. And again, I understand why they're doing this. It's so we can go back down to the water again, because that's scary.
Sure, but it does feel repeated. Like, we just got out of this.
And, like, we already did the whole Rose gets off the lifeboat thing.
Yeah.
But they get down there. And also, it feels like Cal should just be, like, really cold and just be like, well... Because at the end, after he fails to shoot them multiple times, says, "Enjoy the rest of your time together." Feels like he could have just said that.
He could have just
at the top of the boat. He could have just been like, "All right, well, great time to fall in love, I guess." But he does have the best line in the movie. Parker? Would you say it's the best line in the movie?
It is the best line in the movie, specifically for his delivery, because when he puts her in the boat, he's like, "Oh, you must be freezing," and he puts his coat on top.
He
of
takes
her.
Jack's coat off of her and puts his coat on her as like I'm
better. And so she runs away wearing his coat, and he says like, "I hope you enjoy what time you have together." Is really frustrated and like gives up, and then he stops and he starts to laugh, and his manservant is like, "I don't think there's like nothing about this strikes me as funny." And he's like,
"Why could you possibly be laughing?"
He's like, "I put the diamond in the coat, and I put the coat on her." I can't really do it without blowing the mic out, but just it's really funny.
It's a really good line. It's a good delivery. So Jack and Rose are back in the water, and it's very cold, and they try to save a kid. Yeah. And then the dad gets the kid, and then they get crushed by water, and then basically they just try to get back upstairs again.
Yeah, because we've established at this point that the third class passengers are being locked down there.
Yes, they're not being allowed out, which is awful.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
They go to like the kitchen or like the service people staircase that's also locked, but it's easier to bust out.
It's less crowded.
And Fabrizio is there. And that's when Jack and Fabrizio reunite and they hug. And I'm like, all right, cool. They bust through the gate with like a bench. Like the whole group kind of get through. They get up to the top deck. And this is where shit really kind of hits the fan. Because the boat starts splitting in half here, right?
Yeah, it's basically, it's like it's starting to tilt diagonally because the front of it is so full of water at this point. Yeah. And so now like it's reached, because like, they talk about that at a certain point of like, there's a design flaw that the bulkheads are going to fill up and then it's going to basically just snap. Like that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And I think that's about where this goes.
Yeah. But this is, also about the time where the most touching part of like the most like emotional part of the movie happens, where the quartet that's been playing this whole time, which is so famous. Everyone knows the quartet that just kept playing until the boat sank. Yeah. They play Nearer My God to Thee, which is mean. So many shows and movies choose Nearer My God to Thee, and it makes me cry every time. For some reason, I have a very specific connection to that hymn. Yeah, and I feel that. And they play Nearer My God to Thee, and we see an old couple on the bed together in the lower decks as the water rushes in. They're just gonna die together. Yeah. What else do we see? We see some other sad stuff.
We see a mom like telling a bedtime story to her children.
Yeah.
As like the water's seeping in.
Yeah.
It's really effective.
It's really effective. And this part of the movie obviously is very effective because there's just a lot of screaming and people falling off the boat and jumping off the boat. And as the propellers get lifted up, that's awful and horrifying how big the ship is and how big the propellers are compared to everyone in the water.
That like grand dome by the staircase just like shatters and water floods
people get sucked in through windows and it's all awful.
Yeah, there's all sorts of destruction.
But Parker, you also made the point of like, they don't make them like this anymore.
I was like, well, that was the thing. Is like, I'm watching this and I'm like, I think this is the greatest disaster movie ever made.
Yeah.
Because it's just, you could do all of this with CG and it just, I don't know that it would
And it would be safer.
It would be safer. It would be cheaper. It would be all these things. But there's something so tactile about seeing water that you can tell is real flooding into a real set and these stunt actors getting washed away by this stuff. And it's terrifying. And like it is. It's one of those things that you can't fake. In the same way that I had that sense memory about like going to see that exhibit. Another thing I was thinking about that I think I was gonna like I leaned over to say this to you during the movie, and then I think something really dramatic happened and like my attention went back to this. But the scene where while all of this is happening, there's a moment where Jack and Rose are like stuck under behind like a gate, and the water's getting higher and higher, and they're getting like, they get pushed back. When the water breaks and that man and his son get crushed by the water, they like have to crawl their way back up the hallway. And there's something, again, you can tell that they're actually there. You can tell this is Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio against real water. And it reminded me of experiences I've had in my past before with stuff like that, which it like brought back this sense memory of one time my friends and I were going tubing, and we got caught. There was like a really big tree that had kind of toppled over, and its branches were kind of drooping into the water. and we tried to get out of the way of it, but we couldn't. And all three of us crashed into these branches, and we were pinned between the branches of the tree and the rushing water, and just kept getting like sucked down.
Ugh.
And just like, but just the reason that they came to mind is just like, and coming back to the practicality of how this is filmed, there's just a specific sense memory you have of like fighting against rushing water.
Yeah.
That you can't fake in CG. There's no way to do that and have it be believable. And like, you just, I don't know, there's something very tactile about to like all of this destruction going on and the stuff that you're seeing. It's just really effective and really horrifying. And like, it does what it's trying to do in such a hyper specific way.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a really good point as far as like the tactile nature of it.
Which I think like helps sell the last half of this movie. Because if it was just like a CGI bad water fest, I think it wouldn't hit nearly as hard.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I feel like that's basically, well, okay, no. There's still a lot of physical practicality coming up because Jack and Rose do get back up to the top again. And they're up there, and they basically realize, oh, there's no lifeboats left. So the game basically becomes get to the top of the ship, right?
Yeah, stay on the boat as long as possible.
Yeah. And they run through kind of the dining hall area, and Rose sees Thomas Andrews again, and he's looking at the clock. He even takes a moment to like make sure the clock is still in line with his watch, because the clock had stopped working, and she like stops and she looks at him, and he gives her his life belt, right? Yeah. And what does he say to her? He says something like really, "I'm sorry I couldn't have built a better boat for you, miss."
Yeah.
Something like that. And so they keep going. They go up to the top. At this point, the band, the quartet keeps playing. They're still playing, but I think at this point is this when they kind of start getting washed away?
Yeah.
It's "Gentlemen, it's been an honor playing with you," and then the water takes them.
The captain's gone into like the helm's quarters and locked himself in.
They try to ask the captain about something, and he locks himself in the helm. And then the water builds up to the top and crashes through the windows there and kills him. Jack and Rose get up there, and basically there's this group of people who are praying and like holding onto this priest who's trying to steady himself as the tip goes over. And basically Jack and Rose just kind of balance themselves on the railing where she had stood just like the night before, right?
She has like a passing moment. She's like, "Jack, this is where we met."
Right, yeah, and they kind of get on top of the boat as it goes vertical, right?
Yeah.
Did I miss anything super important there?
No, I think
someone hits a propeller. We're seeing people in the water looking up at it. It's really scary.
Yeah.
And then Jack says, "This is it," and we know exactly what's going on. We know that this back part is because it snapped in half. Lovejoy didn't get pulled in. No. Because we were like, how did he die?
Yeah. We're like, because everybody else, again, throughout all of this, like we see Fabrizio get crushed by like one of the smoke stacks falls on him. One of the other main third class passenger like gets shot because they think he's trying to rush a boat, but somebody just pushed him. Like everybody else gets a hyper specific we're gonna watch how they die. But like the last time we see Lovejoy, he's got some blood on his head and he's watching as like the ship breaks apart. He's like right there near the fissure, and then we don't see what happens to him. And it's assumed, he probably just died and fell.
Yeah. But you had searched what happened to him, and in the script, there's something really specific, which is basically just there's a lot of specific detail if he falls into like a metal of a pile of metal and stuff like that. But the article that you read said that he's also not seen in Titanic heaven.
That is the phrase
at the end.
Used. He is absent from He's not allowed in Titanic heaven.
Which I, for one, just wouldn't want to go to Titanic heaven. We'll get to that. We're nearly there.
There.
But yeah, so
Jack says, "This is it." He's like, "The boat's gonna suck us down." Like when just the force of the boat going down, even when we're off the boat, like all of the water's still gonna pull us.
Yeah, so we're gonna hold hands and we're gonna swim as strong as we can. The boat goes under, and they swim up, and there's just
they get separated for a minute. He gets sucked down, and she stays up, and she's frantically searching around. There's a guy who grabs onto Rose and is pushing her under to stay afloat because she has a life jacket and he doesn't.
Which I take issue with. And I mentioned this while we were watching, but There's a tendency in a lot of these movies to be like, humanity's greedy, we're selfish, we'll kill anyone for our chance at survival. And I just think that's not true. And also, it's kind of proven not true, because a lot of people who talk about being in these disaster situations really only talk about how everyone is trying to help one another.
Yeah.
Like, it's very, like, I don't think I've ever heard, like, a real story about someone being truly that selfish. Like, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I have a problem with that. That's fine.
Yeah, it's an odd moment.
She meets back up with Jack. And this is where we kind of see all the people who are just in the water screaming and crying and freezing.
Yeah.
And it's awful. Because I also... go ahead.
Just you had mentioned, because I was talking about how I was like, yeah, this is a movie and we need to see what's happening. And so it's lit to where we can see it. Like the idea being there's a really bright moon or whatever.
Yeah.
But you had told me that like you'd looked into it and like all accounts were that it was pitch black.
It would have been pitch black. You would have just heard the screaming and the splashing until it stopped.
Yeah. But you couldn't see anybody.
You couldn't see anybody. It would have just been screaming in the dark.
Which sounds hellish. That sounds awful.
It was, I imagine.
I'm sure it was.
But yeah, just pitch black out there. But in the movie, we get plenty of moonlight lighting everything so we can see. She meets back up with Jack. She gets on the door, the infamous door. And he's basically like, all right, Rose, never let go. You gotta make it out of here. You gotta have a bunch of babies. You gotta do that for me. Right? And then she's like, I'll never let go. And then they fall asleep for a bit. Meanwhile, the people on the boats elsewhere, Kathy Bates is like, take this boat back. We have plenty of room. Because that's something they mentioned during the panic of it all, is that they aren't packing the boats to capacity. They're sending out like 12 on boats instead of like 60.
Yeah.
And basically they don't spell it out completely, but it's basically just like, yeah, first class is going, right?
Yeah, that's the implication. And
so Kathy Bates is like, let's make room. We can go back and get more people. And the guy on the boat's like, if you keep saying that, there's going to be one less person on this boat. So she's basically silenced. Meanwhile, another boat goes back to get people, but it takes them a while to get organized. They come back. Rose kind of fell asleep in the freezing cold.
They come through and everybody is frozen.
Dead.
They're dead.
Which is awful and haunting.
It's pretty horrifying to see, and a very haunting image. And like, this one shipmate played by, I can never say his name properly. It's Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four movies.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to.
Eoin Griffith. No.
Yeah,
Eoin something. Yeah.
But he's shown up periodically throughout the movie, and like they go out of their way to make him very sympathetic. Of like, he's kind of leading the charge, and he's like, don't hit them. He's like, watch your oars. He's like, move the oars around them. Like, don't smack these people with your oars. Like, please respect the dead.
Yeah. They're coming through. Rose kind of comes to. She was kind of like in and out because she's dying.
Yeah.
And she tries to get Jack's attention. She's like, oh, they came back. And Jack's dead. He's frozen.
Yeah.
And I made I mentioned, this is something that I thought of while I was watching the movie, of like, yeah, at the time watching this, you would have no reason to believe that Jack's going to die. Because they mentioned in the framing device at the start that she went by Rose Dawson for a period of time. So they lead you to believe that there's a chance they might both make it out of this. So I imagine when people were first seeing this, they were like genuinely shocked that Jack was dead. For me, I was like, okay. But he's dead. And she realizes to get to the attention of the boat, she has to grab a whistle from a nearby dead body. And in order to do that, she has to unhook Jack from her. And then he sinks away. And that's when she's like, I'll never let go, Jack. Even though she's, letting him go. It's all very sad. And it was sad. I did feel something. It's sad.
It is sad.
She gets the whistle. She gets them to come back. And that's sort of the end of the flashback. We cut back to her telling everyone the story. And I just have a real problem with a movie cutting back to people hearing the story of the movie and all crying. Yeah. And I understand that in real life, people would probably be crying, but it just feels really self-congratulatory to cut back to characters in the movie listening to the story and being like, wow, what a beautiful story. We're all crying. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
All right, James. Yeah, I get it. You're proud of yourself. They all talk about it for a bit, and he's like, the diamond, and she's like, I don't know, whatever. Because the diamond's dumb. We'll get into that. Basically, we get the flashback wrapped up by, she's like, yeah, I saw Cal one last time, but he didn't see me. I saw him while we were all picked up by the Carpathia, which is the boat that came to save the Titanic passengers. Yeah. And then she
makes a point of the fact that she's like, 6 of us survived in like the people who went into the water. And she's like, I can't remember the exact figure that she gives, but it's literally thousands. She's like, thousands of people went in, 6 came out
of the water. Yeah. And then that's kind of it, right? Is there anything else? Oh, someone comes around and asks her for her name, and she says her name's Rose Dawson.
Right, which is
wraps that up. And then we get a weird scene of Lovett and Rose's granddaughter talking.
I feel like there has to be deleted scenes. I feel like there has to be some sort of subplot they filmed with these two that like introduces some sort of romantic tension that just isn't here.
It's just really odd. And then Rose goes out, and she, at night, after she's told the story, she goes and she throws the diamond into the sea because she had it all these years. That's the big reveal. She finds it in the flashback. She finds it in the coat pocket. She throws it out. She didn't tell anybody. And she goes, oh! She drops it, which I just thought was very endearing. And then she dies.
Yeah, she dies in her sleep.
And it pans over a bunch of photos of her from throughout her life. And then it transitions into
Titanic
Heaven, where she's walking through, and all of the people who died, except for the assholes, are there. And she meets Jack on the staircase, and they all applaud, and Jack and her kiss. And I guess she never really loved her husband.
Yeah. It's
a weird note. You kind of can't not do it.
Right.
In a way,
but
sort of,
it's
the way they wrote
like,
it. But
her being reunited with Jack makes sense. Again, it's kind of a weird little middle finger to her husband we don't meet. But like I make it for the story. I understand.
Yeah, of course.
Her going back to the Titanic after death doesn't make sense to me, because it's like, all right, let's go back to the site of the most traumatic night of your life.
Yeah, but they don't really play it as traumatizing for her.
No.
In fact, like, Rose wasn't it a beautiful night? It was a beautiful ship, and I fell in love. And it's like, I don't know. Have you ever seen The Beach?
No.
It's a Danny Boyle film. It's actually Leonardo DiCaprio's movie after this and The Man in the Iron Mask. He makes The Beach in 2000. It's his big return after 3 years away. And it also has a similarly weird tonal ending of just like, what a fun summer. It's like, no, man. There was a lot of horrible things that happened.
A lot of people died.
And that's how I feel about the Titanic ending, where it's like, you want to go back? Like, I know that Jack's there, I guess, but the implication being that everyone's souls are trapped there, or that she wanted to go back there in the afterlife, and that's just so weird.
It's a very strange call.
Anyway, that's Titanic. We finally hear the full version of My Heart Will Go On. And that's Titanic. Let's get into the criteria, Parker. Do you have anything else you want to say before that, though?
The only thing that I'll add, and it might come up in criteria, but I'll just get it out of the way now, I don't think you need the heart of the ocean in this at all.
Right.
I don't get, like, I understand that it gives a reason for Bill Paxton and all that, but also you could just have that Bill Paxton is a oceanographer. He's interested in he's a historian. He's interested in the Titanic. They find this picture and put it on there. He's like, look at this amazing thing we found. And then he's over the moon. He's like, I need to talk to this lady. Like, this is the lady. Like, let me hear all about it. Like, you were there. That's all you need. You don't need this weird MacGuffin that goes nowhere and does nothing.
Yeah, because we don't need the diamond in the story between her and Cal. Right? Like, it doesn't do anything there except to frame Jack, but we don't really need that either.
And it doesn't do anything for the relationship with her and Jack. If anything, it makes it weird, because we were talking about, like, I don't get why she's like, hey, I want you to draw me nude wearing this necklace for my asshole fiance.
Yeah.
It's like, why? Why that specifically?
Just to, like, get a dig at him? I don't know. It's so weird.
It's a weird choice. I don't know. The whole point.
Dig.
I don't get why the necklace is here. I think you could do without it.
Because then you could say, like, oh, it's a metaphor, because at the end she lets it go. Yeah, she lets it go, but then she's still with Jack in heaven.
Right. It doesn't.
So it's like, what is she letting go of?
Yeah.
It's so weird. It honestly just feels like James Cameron wanted it to be about him. Like a self-insert fan fiction of, like, what if I met someone from the Titanic? But, like, because also he has spent more time with the ship than any of the passengers ever did.
Right.
Like, it's clearly, like, a very big thing for him.
Sure.
But like, he just couldn't imagine any other reason to go down there except his thing, which is, but like that makes it feel like he should have thought of just someone who's interested in it.
Right.
It didn't have to be a filmmaker. It could have been an oceanographer or a historian. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't have to be you.
No, he doesn't, James.
And he doesn't have to be looking for a diamond. Like,
It's a really weird choice. I don't like it very much.
Yeah, it's so weird.
That's really all that I had to say before getting into criteria.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say.
Okay.
So yeah, criteria.
Cultural and historical significance.
I think we're running into pop cultural significance again.
Yeah.
This has a huge, not to bring up Forrest Gump again, but it feels similar to that in this era of 90s films that are so kind of influential on pop culture. I know that it clearly was a big production. It did a lot. Do you know anything about as far as its technical advancements? Was it CGI people a big thing in 97 or?
I know the CGI boat was a really big deal and the CGI water. I think that was a really big deal and
had
been
is
pioneered.
Pre-Finding Nemo and stuff.
Yeah, and this is pioneered by James Cameron previously on his work on The Abyss.
Yes.
And this is taking it a step further with simulation and stuff like that.
Right.
Let's see. I'm looking up right now because I wanted to see where it lands adjusted for inflation. So adjusted for inflation, it is still the 5th highest grossing film of all time.
Yeah. And it held that for a while.
Yeah. Topped only by, again, adjusted for inflation, Gone with the Wind, the original Star Wars, Sound of Music, and E.T. Those are the 4 that precede it.
That's nice. It's nice to hear the adjusted for inflation ones after hearing all the usual not ones that are just kind of.
The adjusted for inflation list is interesting.
E.T.'s number 1.
No, Gone with the Wind is number 1.
Oh, right. I was like, wow.
Yeah, Gone with the Wind.
E.T.'s number 4.
I went down the list. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I was like, wow.
So I know that's obviously box office isn't everything, but also that's a big part of this movie's legacy is just how many records it just decimated when it came out.
Yeah.
And I think it has one of the longest theatrical runs too.
Yeah.
It stayed in theaters for 16 months.
I read that because it was in theaters for so long, theaters had to send out for a new print because they wore theirs out. This was playing constantly for a while. Right. And has come back multiple times.
It has.
It even came back last year, right? Or 2 years ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously it has that culture thing, but does it beat out Citizen Kane?
I don't know. This is what's interesting about film history, is that you have to deal with chronology, you have to deal with the passage of time, and you have to deal with films that fall in and out of vogue and in and out of culture, but also grapple with what their impact was moving forward. And that's the thing that I'm trying to think about, is that recency bias leads me to believe Titanic. But additionally, looking at, if I just compare this to, okay, how many other films tried to be Citizen Kane after Citizen Kane came out versus how many films tried to be Titanic?
Sure.
And there are so many movies that try to be Titanic.
In different ways.
In different ways.
Some of them went the disaster route, others went
the big broad romance.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Bay tried to do Pearl Harbor.
Right, Pearl Harbor is the most obvious.
The most egregious one, yeah.
Yeah, the worst offender in that regard. But when I think about historical and technical relevance and impact, I do consider that too of okay, how many copycats did this inspire?
Sure.
How many people were trying to capture this lightning in a bottle?
Yeah.
And it feels like Titanic has more the things Titanic has to offer to the media landscape and the film landscape and films that are in conversation with Titanic feels more prominent than films that are in conversation with Citizen Kane. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm pretty split on it, but maybe give it to Titanic. What do you think?
I don't know. I it's something that we've hit upon a few times
Mm-hmm.
of this idea of like the cultural relevancy. Because when we came up with the criteria, this arbitrary criteria that we invented, we could change any time.
Yes.
We went for technical and historical relevance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as far as technical and historical, it goes to Citizen Kane. But
Okay.
the cultural relevance, I don't know. Yeah, okay. You know what?
Let's leave it at 50-50
Okay, let's
for
leave
now.
it 50-50 for now. And
Let's
go
leave it
into
a split.
Because this second one's going to be really easy and interesting to talk about.
Yeah. You want to start out?
Yeah, as far as how well I think Titanic is doing what it's trying to do, we talked about it. I think it's a clean split. I think that the second half of this movie is doing what it's trying to do incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's absolutely selling on the stress, the dread, the fear, and just the horror of the Titanic. And I think it even makes the Jack and Rose romance work in the second half, like having them specifically with like their whole little shenanigans thing leading up to the iceberg.
Yeah.
And then like from that point on, like I believe it from that point on. But that first half, Parker, is so
It's rough.
it doesn't feel like it's working for me at all.
Yeah.
As far as like because the first half is mainly devoted to getting me to buy into this romance. And I personally didn't buy in. And I can point to things that I think could have been done better to help me buy in, but also it's pretty clear that for a lot of other people it does work. Right? Like that's what's tricky.
Yeah.
However, this show is highly subjective. And so for me, I would say that if the second half of Titanic was its own movie, the second half of Titanic would beat Citizen Kane.
Sure.
But the second half of Titanic, not unlike the second half of the real Titanic, is being dragged down by the other. And I think I would give it to Citizen Kane. Because you know me, I've been sweetening on Citizen Kane over the last few weeks.
You have.
For
I've
some
noticed
reason.
that.
So I think I'll give it to Citizen Kane, the second one. What about you?
I would agree. If this movie was just the second half, if you padded it out and made it a 2-hour second half of this movie and that was it, I would say that it's better. I think it is a pretty flawless, like, we're never going to get a movie that depicts the wreckage of the Titanic this good ever again, I think. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And like, but that isn't what all this is. It's also this grand love story, and I don't think that's working the way that it thinks it is. So I would agree. I think I'm going to say Citizen Kane on that one.
Right, but again, like, does the fact that this is like the definitive disaster movie on a craft level, on like every level, does that give it any more leverage, or is the first half? No, because the first half comes
Look
first.
at the poster. The poster is them.
That's
the
true. It's
poster
not
is the
boat.
boat at the bottom and them at the top.
You're right. Okay,
It's
you're
about
right.
them.
I agree. Okay,
So,
thank
like,
you for convincing me to agree with myself.
Yeah, you don't talk yourself out of it. Like, I agree. It's on a technical level as like the greatest disaster movie ever made, arguably. There's a lot going on, but also that's not what the movie is selling you. The movie is selling you
because
the
we
romance.
end with Jack and Rose.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, I agree. Okay.
So I would
good.
agree.
Man, I'm smart.
You're smart.
Just kidding. Okay. Third.
Okay, personal enjoyment, personal connection with this.
Do you enjoy or connect with this more than you do with Citizen Kane?
No. Again, we're talking about 3 movies right now. We're talking about Citizen Kane. We're talking about the first half of Titanic.
Titanic Part 1 and Titanic Part 2.
Titanic Part 2, I'm all in on, and I was invested. I was like, wow, this is crazy.
And the emotional beats hit for me. Like,
Yep, I cried.
Near my
Like
God
it,
to
yep.
Thee, the Jack and Rose ending, like aside from like the very end, but like Jack's death, all hit for me.
Yep.
But again, that first half,
That
Titanic
first
Part 1.
hour and a half, Titanic Part 1, I'm just not getting anything out of.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And that's so true. This is so hard.
This is so hard.
This is really tricky.
These
I wasn't
stupid arbitrary
expecting it.
things we gave to ourselves.
Yeah, so I'm gonna also give it to Citizen Kane. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
And
where
then,
I'm landing.
but then I do want to give Titanic one thing. So I will give it the historical relevance, even though I
Okay.
don't fully agree with that. But I do think that Titanic deserves one thing. It's not
This
a
is-
clean sweep from Citizen Kane.
This is one of those like 50-50 episodes. This is a splitting hair episode of like it could go either way. Based on our criteria though, I think I'm cool calling it and saying that Citizen Kane is better than Titanic.
Yeah, I agree. And also, even taking a step back from the criteria, Citizen Kane is still just maybe a better built film than the Titanic.
That's the thing, is like literally, if you chopped an hour out of this movie and streamlined it a little bit and made it a little bit more focused, I think it would be an overall better film than Citizen Kane.
Right.
But as it stands now, as 3 hours of a lot of unnecessary stuff that feels like it isn't landing the way that we want it to lead up to James Cameron's big showmanship, here's what I am as a filmmaker, which he lands ridiculously well. I think that Citizen Kane as a film is a much tighter, more focused, more like polished final object.
And consistently showing what its strengths are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so Titanic is not better than Citizen Kane.
I don't think so.
Great. Woof.
There we go.
All right. Well, glad we could knock that one out.
Woof.
Cool. Parker, do you want to tell everybody what we're going to be talking about next time?
Yes, I do. So next time we are easing on into spooky time season, specifically because Max and I, just generally as people, we both seem to start celebrating like autumn Halloween spooky fests into September rather than October, and just kind of lean into that. And so we're going to do that. We're going to do a nice segue movie.
Yes. Something that's it's not full on Halloween autumn, but it is leading us there.
It's a transitionary movie.
Yes.
So we are going to be looking at 1954's The Night of the Hunter, which I'm very excited.
I'm excited to rewatch. It's really good.
It's a really good one.
Super fun. So
look forward to that. I think that'll be a really good episode. I'm just stoked to talk about that movie with you.
Yeah, I'm stoked to talk about it. So yeah, hey everybody, stay safe out there. Have a good 2 weeks or so.
Absolutely. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. We'll catch you again next time.
See you next time.